I was born out in Clover, in the little farming community. I was born at home, as was he in his home, but he was born in Buell, and I was born in Clover, and Clover was 5 miles out of Buell. So my goodness sakes, that was a long way. You didn't. Yeah, yeah. We had cars, but it was just a different world altogether. And of course, I went to parochial school in Clover, and he went to grade school in Buell. And I knew his sister and I knew his brother, but I did not meet him until at the barbecue. But yes, I went to. I was kind of a. When I say dumb farm girl, I don't mean it dumb in the sense in the social side of it, because our family's life pretty much revolved around our church and the church community in Clover. And his revolved around his family in Buell. So, and he was enough older. He was a year older than my brother. My brother was graduated the year after Robert did. I had one brother and two sisters. There were four of us, and I was the middle child of the sisters. But my older brother and my older sister, well, my brother was such a neat guy, I thought. And my sister, I thought, was just beautiful. She was a drum majorette for Buell High School Band. And I thought, oh, she is so pretty. And I was called Fatty Arbuckles. I was a chubby little rascal. And I was defiant from the time I was little. And I do remember a spanking I got once because my dad had let us play in the irrigation water out on our lawn, because you flooded the lawn when you irrigated. And it was time to come in. He told me to come in. And I said, no, I don't want to. And he came after me, and I ran around the house and made him chase me. Then I got paddled. But I remember that. I remember that. And another time I remember is when I got kicked in the stomach by a donkey because the neighbor had a donkey, and he brought him over, and Gordon said, well, to make him move, hit him on the flanks. And he gave me a little short stick, and I was right behind him, hitting him on the flanks. And the next thing I remember, I was down in the ditch, and I couldn't breathe. Oh. And I told Gordon to go get my mother. I was going to die. But I was just had the breath just knocked out of me. But little things like that. And I fell in the lateral once. Mother wanted me to do some dishes, and I said I didn't want to right then. So I went along the lateral and slipped, fell in, and was fortunate not to have drowned. I was able to grab onto a clump of grass that held for me long enough to get out of the water. Robert had to help his family. He delivered papers. He just did anything that he could do to help his family, because his father had a business in Buell, a good business. And his mother became ill, and the doctor said what she needed was a change of climate. So they went to Oregon, and the change of climate, and Grandpa just had to sell out, and he was doing quite well because she had paid help.
It was a hardware store?
No, it was a drayage business. And so anyhow, they had a couple of rough years, and they went back to Iowa and Missouri, where Robert had spent, the whole family spent time back there. And then Robert's father came back out to Idaho, and where did they meet him? I don't know if it was Montana or what, but Robert had a no, that wasn't when he had the car. I know they had a whole bunch of flats coming back. And so they were in Iowa and Missouri for about 7 years. He went through the first grade twice because of that, because they asked him what grade he was in, and he was ready to go in the second, but he told them he was in the first grade, so yeah. And with me, I went to kindergarten, and I was only 5, and they had 2 children in the kindergarten, a little boy and me. This was in public school, but the public school teacher was boarding with my parents. So they sent me to school, and the little boy was not as ready for school as I was. So she took me clear through the first grade instead of kindergarten. So I didn't have to take first grade when I got to parochial school.
Wow.
So consequently, I graduated. I was ahead of everybody in all of the rest of the kids that I went to school with were a year older than I was, at least. And so that kind of put me at a disadvantage too. I was not mature socially. So it was kind of hard for me when I went to high school, because I liked people. I wanted to be with them. I was on the tumbling team, and Robert was in the drama team, and he was a good actor. He was in 2 of their main school plays. He never talked about things like that, but he was the backbone of his family. There's no doubt about it, because if ever anything went wrong, they always called on Robert. And that's just the way he was. And he bought a car, but the whole family used it. So he was such a giving person too. And he took his mother to all of her meetings because she couldn't drive. So, but he was well liked by everybody. And he was well liked because they knew he was a person they could depend on. And so he was running the booth in the theater, he'd run those movies. Yes, I was working in the Blue Pig Barbecue in Buell, Idaho. That's where I graduated. And he came in with, had a date with one of the girls I went to school with. It was what do they call it? The army, not. Oh shoot, I can't remember the name of it, but the National Guard. He was part of the National Guard, and he had taken Betty Lou to the dance, and they came up to have a hamburger or something afterward, and he was going to take her home. And there was a big mud puddle out in the one driveway, and he kind of got stuck in it. And they helped some of the fellows around the barbecue. They helped him out. And when he left his cousin there, and then he was going to come back and pick up his cousin. Well, in the meantime, his cousin got into a real argument with one of the local farmers, and I was rather frightened. I didn't know what was going to happen. About that time, Robert walks in, and he settled both of the guys down, and the farmer went on his way, and Virgil went on his way. And so then I had to close the place up, and he said he would take me home. And of course, after he came in, he just calmed the situation down and was so neat about it and so handsome. And I just positively fell in love with the man. And he wasn't real anxious about going out with me because I was only 17. And he didn't think that was too wise because he was 22. But I kind of kept right at him until he took me home and we had our first date. And I thought, oh, I'll never get over that man. He is something. And then he didn't show up for 2 days. I thought he'd be back to the barbecue to at least come by and say hi, but he didn't for 2 days. And he said, when I finally asked him about it, he said, no, he said, I was a little afraid that maybe you wouldn't want to see me again. And from there was all, there was no doubt in his mind or mine, except he was worried about me being young. So that was the beginning, and we just took it from there. And that was the beginning of the R.B. Probasco's family. And all these little ones running around. Well, my first one was Anne, and we were just a little bit afraid to, he was a little afraid to ask my father for me to marry him because of my age. And of course, I was young and kind of foolish, and I said, well, we can fix that. I can get pregnant, and then they'll have to let me marry you, except that after the deed was done, why, we didn't tell anybody. We kept it to ourselves, and he got me a watch, and we were officially engaged with the watch. My father was kind of glary. So anyhow, we decided that this was what we would do. We would start a family, which we did. And it was, they didn't know when we got married, nobody but the doctor, and he and I knew. But it was pretty evident very shortly after we married. And it really didn't make a whole lot of difference to us, but in those days, when something like that happened, you were shunned. There was just no getting around it. So it was kind of rough for me for a little while, but he was right there with me all the time. And he wasn't the sort of person that was going to pull out and desert you. So anyhow, then we kept we rented a house. Well, first we rented an apartment, then we rented a house, and then the next thing, she was about ready to, or I was about ready to deliver, I guess I should say. Called my mother-in-law in because she was right in town. My parents were out, and she said, well, call the doctor. And she asked him when he got there, shall we take her to the hospital? And he said, well, if you don't want the baby born here, you better. So we had to drive 17 miles to the hospital, and I was in labor, and I had no idea what labor and all that sort of thing really entailed. But I got to the hospital door, the front door, and my water broke, and there was no time to prep me or anything. They took me right in, and Anne was delivered. It only took me about, from the time I started till the time she was delivered, and the trip to Twin Falls only took about, well, not more than 2 hours.
She was in a hurry.
Yes. And it was very odd. We were both young and enough to not know that much about babies. Robert thought she was deformed because her head was bigger than her body, which is just natural for babies, but he didn't know that. And his mother was there and said, no, there's nothing wrong with her. So she was our first. We did have some problems. She was allergic to food and a lot of things, but she was such a quick-witted thing, even as a baby. And that was the beginning of Anne, and she's been a challenge all of her life, as I told you last night, because she's a very brilliant young lady, but the easy things she finds difficult. Anything difficult or has a challenge, she's all for it, and she'll figure it out. And that's the beginning, and she's ready to retire now. She should have retired 5 years ago, but she is now 70, and she's still going like a house afire. Robert was called into the service because at that time they were getting ready to train young men for the draft. And since he was National Guard, they called the National Guard in to train the draftees.
What year was this?
That was in 1940. So he had to go up to Fort Lewis, and he didn't want to leave us. So we went up to Fort Lewis with him, and that was quite a shock to someone from a small town to be in a town like Tacoma and near Seattle and the whole bit. It was pretty foreign to me. I was still a farm girl. But anyhow, it was hard to find housing because they were used to the Army being up there, and they were not very happy with any of the Army people. So they would have, when he was first called into the service, they would have signs on some of the shops like no soldiers or dogs allowed, and this sort of thing. And that's when the Salvation Army was so good to the enlisted people. And we kind of had a prejudice against the Red Cross because they were always there for the officers. But the plain GI. Anyhow, Robert got his sergeant's stripes, and he was training. And I became pregnant again. And I wondered what we were going to do for clothing and everything for the new baby. And I didn't know that I could get medical care from the Army. So I didn't even see a doctor till I was about 7 months along with him. And I finally went in to see him. So then he was given an opportunity. The married men in the National Guard, and of course they were part of the regular Army now, but they were given, the married men, they gave them a chance to get out of the service if they had a hard time supporting their families. Well, Robert was a sergeant and he made $60 a month, but that's what we lived on. Made a car payment, paid for our rent, and paid about, well, the cost of Anne's milk, because she was so allergic she couldn't drink milk. And so we had expenses because we didn't know the Army would take care of those things. So then anyhow, when he finally got his discharge, there was Robert and one other sergeant, and his wife had already gone back home, but I was still there and very pregnant, and it was about time for Lloyd to be born. So we packed up our little Model A Ford, and they made a bed for me in the back and hoped I wouldn't have the baby before we got back to Buell. And we got back, I don't know, it was 5 to 10 days before Lloyd was born. And he was born, they started my labor for the simple reason that Robert wanted to see his brother. His brother was being shipped overseas. So Robert wanted to go to Salt Lake to see him before he left. So the doctor gave me castor oil, got me started in labor, and Lloyd was born and was determined to be healthy and just fine. He had a male's voice the minute he was born, and when the doctor turned him over, he lifted himself up on his front arms. Just amazing. Amazed the doctor. Anyhow, Robert could see that all was well. So he took off for Salt Lake to see his brother. And my parents were gone on a vacation, and it was his mother and father that cared for me while Robert was gone on this little trip. And that was Lloyd's entry into the world. And he was born in November the 8th. And it was December when war was declared, and we figured they'd call Robert right back into the Army. So we were prepared for it, except somewhere along the line, they must have lost his, they did, I guess, lose his records to the point they never did call him. So here he was out of the Army. He couldn't get a job in Buell. So that's when we moved to Ogden, Utah. And we took the 2 babies with us down there. And he got on at Hill Air Force Base. And that's when the Army decided to call him in, and they wanted to send him to officers training school for radio. And he was willing to go and ready to go, but the guy that was over the work, they were building all those hangars for the airplanes in, and he was so good at not being afraid of the heights, up in the top pulling wire and this sort of thing. So the Hill Air Force Base wanted to keep him, and the Army says no, they needed him. And Robert, they asked Robert how he felt. He said, I'll go wherever you want. You decide between you where you want me. And that's when the guy at Hill Air Force Base won out. And that's how come he didn't have to serve overseas or anything. But that's how come we ended up there. And Lloyd was just a big boy and a real neat little baby. He wasn't a little baby. He was bigger than all the kids his age, except when he got about 12 or something like that. They all shot up, and he stayed the same height. Just irked him. But he was very good at sports and this sort of thing. And he wanted to be a minister. So he, instead of finishing high school at the public high school, they went to parochial school. He went to Portland and finished his high school at the Portland Lutheran High School, and then went on to their junior college at Portland, which is now a university. And so he has been in church work ever since.
Okay.
And Anne went to school up there in nurses training, and she was a registered nurse, and he didn't, he kind of changed his mind. He met a girl, and she was from my hometown, and he followed her to Nebraska, and we said, well, you're kind of serious? And he said, no. He said, he asked us if he could get a potato to take back to Ruth. And we were teasing him about it, but he was serious, and Ruth and he got together, and they married, and they're still married, and they've got their family now.
Okay. So did Anne go to Concordia too? Or?
No, she went to the nurses' school. The ELCA had a nursing school there, and they did try to talk her into going on to the university because they said she really should go on and be a doctor. But at least she should get her bachelor's degree because she was such a good nurse. And she said, no, I don't want that, because the minute you get your bachelor's degree, you have to be in administration, and I want to take care of my patients. So
she kind of ended up in administration, didn't she?
She sure did. She sure did. And Lloyd has just, he didn't become a minister, but he has just kind of devoted his life to church, because we almost lost him. He almost drowned. And then he had some severe burns when they burned him with the hot water bottles when they were trying to revive him. And that was a kind of a tough time too. In the meantime, I was pregnant again. So it... Virgil was born in July, and Lloyd had turned 2 in November. So they were just little stair steps. And because Lloyd needed so much care, why Virgil kind of got shoved in the background, not intentionally, but Lloyd did need a lot of care. And then we finally got him home, and he started to get well, and Virgil had colic, and there were a lot of things, and I think a lot of it was just the fact that the poor little kid didn't get the attention that he really deserved. But we loved him anyhow. And he was a lovable kid, cutest little guy. And Virgil has been a source of pleasure and pride all of our lives. Anne was born in 1940, and Lloyd was born in 1941 in November, and then Virgil was born in 1943. And as I say, we didn't mean to disregard him, but by the way, when he was in the high chair and it was time for him to eat, and we were teaching him to eat out of the spoon and this sort of thing, he did not want me to feed him. He wanted Anne to feed him, thank you. So I'd have to sit Anne on a high stool and she would feed him. And he'd get upset when anybody else had tried to feed him. So by then, the three of them, Anne and Lloyd and Virgil, became thick as thieves. They just... But Virgil was always a happy baby after he got over his colic, and never knew a stranger. And if he'd see a stranger, he'd walk up to them and he'd say, "Hi, how are you? I'm Virgil." And that was just the way he was from the time he was a little boy. And he got jobs when he shouldn't have been working, but he got a job. And he'd walk to work when he was working at the cement company. And he'd walk to go fishing. He'd walk up to the dam up above Ogden, hitch rides and stuff to go fishing. So we had trouble with Virgil. Wasn't able to speak very well, and a lot of it was because we hadn't had enough time to take with him to get him to pronounce his words. So they thought he was tongue-tied, so they clipped his tongue, thinking that would help, and it did help. But he's nothing wrong with his speech now, that's for sure. And then in 44, then I was pregnant with Shirley, and by then my body was getting a little bit tired. And I didn't feel as perky and as well with her as I did the others. But when she was born a little bit early. And so 6 pounds nowadays sounds like that's a good-sized baby. But when Shirley was born, she was a bigger boned baby and should have weighed more. She was really, her skin was almost translucent. We'd carry her around on a pillow because she just didn't seem to be completely ready to be born yet, but she was. And then she got sick, and she apparently had a lot of phlegm in her lungs or whatever it was at that time. But they didn't know then what they know now about things like that. But she did have quite a problem, became very ill when we moved from the little house that we were renting to the house that we purchased on Norden Avenue. And in the move, she got very sick, and my mother was with us and said, "You've got to do something. This baby is sick." So we took her to the emergency, And they kept her and they worked with her, but she was ready to go right into pneumonia. So we sweat that one out. But after she got through, well, she's had an allergy ever since, but then she was healthy. But she was always a quiet person. And you never, she'd go by herself, take off by herself and read or whatever. Avid reader, very smart person, good grades all through junior high or through school. And she always surprised us because she came home one day and she told us she was in a play, which was a complete surprise to us. We had no idea. And she ended up being in 2 different plays while she was in junior high. She was, Anne was in the marching group. Shirley made the marching group. And she just kept going. She's a good student. But she, then when Anne graduated from nurses training, she talked Shirley into coming back to Nebraska with her and going to school at Concordia. But Shirley said, I didn't want to be a teacher. And that's what Concordia and Seward was at that time, teacher's college. So she went to a business school and she was good. She was good in her business dealings. And so it was about that time that Shirley met, was it Bob? She met Bob first. And she and Bob were close friends. And I don't know if Bob introduced her to Don or what, but anyhow, she was living with Anne until she decided not to go to school, and then she had to get a job and work for her room and board, plus the job that she was working as a waitress. Just it amazes me when I think about how they just took over with their lives after they graduated from high school. Did very well. And so we had a little respite then because Virgil and Shirley are very close together. They're only 14 months apart. And another thing was I was pregnant with Shirley. We still had Lloyd to deal with.
Was Lloyd still sick a little bit?
Well, he wasn't sick so much as he was, the burn had left horrible scars on his back. And it left a real impression on us because we came so close to losing him. He was floating in the water and I tried to pull him out and I couldn't. And some guy was driving by on his way to lunch and he came over and I was trying to give Lloyd artificial respiration. I didn't know how. And this guy took over and that's how he got him to breathing. Okay, well, then I was pregnant again, and as usual, I'd say, how in the world are we going to be able to support these children? And Grandpa said, just the way we did when we had 3 and then we had 4. Now we've got 4 and we'll have 5. So it'll be just fine. Don't worry. He never worried about a thing. Loved every one of those kids to death. And so anyhow, when I became pregnant with Dale, we waited and waited, and here we had another boy, so that made us with 3 boys, and he was a blue baby, and like I said, it was kind of scary because I was upset they didn't bring him to me, and I wondered why. And they said, "Oh, he's in the nursery." And I said, "But why don't you bring him to me to nurse?" And they said, "Well, he's had a little problem." And I said, "What's the problem? I want to see. I want to see if he's all right." And of course, then they kept you in bed. You didn't, no thought of be walking over to the nursery to see, because that was not allowed. And fathers weren't allowed to see their children born. It was, and that was something that always made Grandpa cross, because he didn't like that. Anyhow, it took probably, I don't know if it was a week that we were in the hospital, but they finally brought Dale to me, and I was so glad to see him. And I said, "And so what's wrong with him?" And about then he started to cry, and he started turning blue. And I said, "Okay, take him back so he can breathe." And I realized we had a real problem then, but it cleared up within a week, and so we were able to bring him home. And he was our cute baby boy, and that was supposedly our family. And then Peggy was upset when she said everything was fine. We had our family. She said, "So what was I?" Anyhow, I became ill, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong with me, and the usual signs of pregnancy were not there. I wasn't sick. I was still having my periods. There was nothing to indicate I was pregnant, but I was just sick. I just felt terrible. So they treated me for an ulcer until I think I told you wrong last night about the time. I think it was about 4.5 months before they finally realized I was pregnant, or before I realized it, because there still were no indications that I was pregnant as far as the physical aspect. And so they, I can't remember what they did, but they said, yes, definitely I was pregnant. So that was unforeseen. And I said, "Now what are we going to do? We're going to have 5 of them. Or we've got 5. We're going to have 6. How are we ever able to afford this?" And of course, Grandpa says, "Don't worry, we'll do just with 6 like we did with 5. So it was a pregnancy that, well, we ran into some troubles, because on the railroad, Robert was a steward, and he had to be think about his the men, and so because he insisted that they follow the union rules, the one big shot on the railroad at that time said, "Probasco, I'm going to cut till I get to you." And he did. He cut help until he got rid of Robert. And so then Robert had no job, and we really wondered what we were going to do. And he said, "Well, they're hiring for the Tennessee Valley Authority." And so he and another one of the guys that they cut had to go. And that's when he went to Paducah, Kentucky, and lived there. And I was pregnant with Peggy. And that was quite an experience to have to get 5 children off. And I was working. And I fell twice, and I thought, oh dear, I'm going to lose this baby. But I fell once in the parking lot of the defense depot where I was working. And another time I was shoveling snow in the driveway and fell. But things went along fine. And anyhow, Robert decided he really wanted to go fishing this one time. And it was about time for Shirley, but we still figured we had a good month, maybe 6 weeks to a month yet. He wanted to go fishing. I said, fine. My friends came over to visit and be with me. Now, this is after he got back from, he got his job back, and we were back with the railroad again. He went on this fishing trip, and my friends came over to stay with me because I said, I think I'm going into labor. Where's Robert? He's fishing. And of course, I couldn't reach him. So anyhow, I told Ann. Ann was 12 years old at the time. And Robert's nephew was there with me, staying there with me. And he was, I don't know if he was in the service at the time or how come. But anyhow, he was there in Ogden. And he was there. And anyhow, I told Ann, I says, Ann, I'm going to have to go to the hospital. I'm going to have this baby. And so Bobby said, he was the nephew that was named after Robert. And he says, well, I'll be here with the kids. And I says, yeah, but I want Robert. Excuse me. But anyhow, my friends came over and they said, well, we'll take you to the hospital. And I said, no, I'm going to wait for Robert. So he came in the door and I said, oh, am I glad to see you? And he says, what's going on? And I said, well, I'm going into labor. I'm into labor and I have to go to the hospital. And he says, oh, no, not tonight. I'm too tired. My friends were quite upset with him, but I wasn't. That was just him voicing his opinion. He'd been out fishing. But tired or not, why, he took me to the hospital. And the nurse says, well, don't you want me to call him in here? And I said, he's been fishing. Let him get a little sleep. So Peggy was... she was born, and the doctor that I had, that was it. He wasn't available that night, so I had a substitute doctor, someone I'd never even heard about before. And Peggy was born, and she was early, but she was not in too bad a shape. And I was oohing and ahhing all the way after I'd delivered her and saying, gee, she looks just like Lloyd. Isn't she a pretty baby? This sort of thing. The nurses finally had to tell me to shut up. I was waking everybody up. So I did shut up. And that was the beginning of our Peggy. And we were supposed to name her before we left the hospital. We didn't have a name picked out. We didn't know if it was going to be girl or boy. So they called me from the hospital and said, we've got to have a name. Well, we never did until the second call, and we finally chose a name. And Peggy Lee was a singer at that time. And they all thought that was a pretty name, so we called her Peggy Lee. That's how she got her name. But it was never recorded. And so when she went to get her passport to go to Australia, she was still listed as baby girl Probasco. And she was really upset. But we got it all straightened out finally. And she got her passport and the whole bit. But she was a pure delight, pretty little girl, friendly, just, she was Daddy's girl. And at that time, that's when my husband became such a good cook, because we had all these children. I'd get them off to school. He'd be there when they came home. We didn't have the time together that we really wanted, but they had their parents around. And he turned out to be a crackerjack cook, good cook. Taught me a lot. When he got out of the service, we went to Ogden, Utah. That's where he found work, and that's when he went to work at Hill Air Force Base, and we discussed that earlier. And he wanted to go to work for the railroad, but it took a little while before there was an opening. In the meantime, he was driving the sailors to the Clearfield Naval Depot out there, and driving the bus for the Air Force that had people out there, and the Army depot that had the depot out on the other end of town. So he did that until he finally got on at the railroad, and they discovered that he was really a very talented man. He never said anything like that, but he would fix radios, and he really knew his radios. He had a radio shop in Buell also before we were married. And shortly after we were married too. And he also was a ham radio operator. And his numbers were W7EQX. I remember him to this day, because shortly after we were married, instead of getting the stove started and heating the house, he'd get up early in the morning, get over on his radio, and start his calling. And I still got all the cards that he got from the radio operators throughout the world. That was quite a thing. Yeah. Anyhow, then we moved to Ogden. And like I said, he finally got to work for the railroad. But when he was working out at Hill Air Force Base, he had a good job out there, and they really needed him. And that's when they had the argument, where's he going to work? For us, or are you going to take him back in the service? But he would pull wire in those hangars way, way up. And he was with one of the electricians one time who was pulling wire and slipped and fell the whole distance. And those hangars are big. So that kind of bothered him for a while. Between 1940 and 1946, let's see. Yeah, 1946. We had 5 children. And then Peggy was born in 1952. So we were busy all the time because kids were in Scouts, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, Cub Scouts, Brownies. And then in their teen years, they were in Walther League. And that was the youth group in the Lutheran Church. And Virgil went to Valparaiso, Indiana, and went to college there for a while. And because we didn't have enough money, and he couldn't work and keep up his grades too. Why, he was pulled into the service, and Lloyd was still going to school. No, by then he was married. And Virgil went into the service, though. And we were very proud of him, but he was shipped to Vietnam, and he hadn't even had a full training course, I don't think, before they shipped him out. And it was, and at Shirley's wedding, he was on R&R and was able to call us from wherever he was having his R&R on her wedding, so everybody got to hear him, know he was okay. But he had quite a lot of experiences that he wouldn't talk about. When he came back, he didn't want to talk about them, and Dale was kind of cocky. He says, he got into it with Virgil on the Marines, saying something about the Navy, and Virgil was a Marine, and the boys started kind of arguing. Robert came in between them and went like this, and he says, I'll tell you what, you're a Marine and you're a sailor, but I'm from the Army, and I'm separating the two of you right now. We spent our 25th wedding anniversary in Seward, Nebraska with the Niemans, because it was their 25th wedding anniversary in December, and ours was in January, and we were here in Nebraska. And the Niemans had a big to-do, and that's when Curtis was a baby, and he was a jewel. He was just the life of the party. Funniest little guy you ever saw. The sparkle of mischief in his eye that he still has to this day. But that's when we celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary. And then the kids had a celebration for us on our 40th wedding anniversary, that all the Niemans came from Nebraska and filled up the whole motel. Took every room in that motel. It was right down on 36th and Washington. And we had a ball. And that was at Shirley's wedding. And that's at the time that Virgil called us from Vietnam. And then our 40th, his specialty was chili verde. Best chili verde I ever tasted. But he could fix whatever. He even baked an apple pie once. Told him he couldn't do that. He couldn't work the dough like that. You didn't do that with pie dough. He said, well, here's the pie. It was fine. Leave it to him. When Virgil brought one of his friends home for dinner one Sunday, Robert was great to bring out a platter of food and turn it around. And here he brought out this platter of chicken and was going to show us how he could turn it around. And all the chicken fell on the floor. So he said, well, that's all right. He just picked it up and cleaned it off and set it on the table, and we had chicken. We talked about wanting a cabin, and he had a friend whom he met in AA, and he was a realtor. And he said, we've got a piece of property. He showed us property all around Ogden, and none of it hit us. But then he said, I've got this property, and he wanted to show it to Robert. And Robert says, no, I don't think so. This is in Idaho. And he said, where is it? And so Dave told him, and he and I went to look at it then. And of course, we both fell in love with it. The dust was calf high. There was no water to be had around there. But we decided that was a place for us. So we bought the property, and we didn't do anything with it for a long time. And we finally decided the first thing we ought to do is put a well on the property. And I was working for Farmers Grain then, and they told me, be sure you get your water rights when you when you dig your well. Well, we didn't know anything about where you should put a well or anything. So we put it down on the northwest edge of the first property. And it was so it would be right there. If we decided to put anything on the second property, we could use the same well for both pieces. And we called this man in to drill for us. And he kept going down, and we kept looking at that bill and what it was costing us to drill. And he finally called us one day, and he says, I'm at 350 feet, and we haven't hit anything. What do you want me to do? Robert said, I'm going to have to pay for the 350 feet no matter what. Keep on going. Well, they hit water at 352, and it was a gusher. It came up to within 200, it came up 200 feet when he hit it. And good, clear water, and the pressure was great. So anyhow, we had water on our property. And we went to Montana to see people who built log houses and tried to get a bid. And finally, some young man, I said, well, this is what I'd kind of like to have. Robert says, well, tell him. So I said, I want 36 by 36 OD, outside dimensions. So I don't know what that's going to make on the inside. So that would depend on the logs. We bought 8-inch logs. And we bought this, it was like a log building set. They were all cut and notched after we got our plans and decided what we wanted. Why, we bought these logs, and they finally said the logs are ready. We're going to bring them in, but you've got to have somebody there to help you unload. And when they came with the logs, the two guys that were going to help us unload couldn't find the place. And I was desperate because they said, well, we'll just have to dump them then, because we're not coming back. So I went down the road. Everybody that I thought I could recognize a car, that it was part of the neighborhood coming into the property, I just stopped and asked him. And I finally stopped at Perry and Helen Grube's home. And I said, we're desperate. We need help. Well, I never saw so many really good neighbors. They all pitched in and came up and helped unload those logs. And from there on, All I can say is they sure were good neighbors, all of them. Wonderful people. And so we started building our log house, and we didn't get the logs until the latter part of September. And we got, and before we could even start doing anything, we had to clear the trees off the land, and Curtis and Eric were visiting us at the time. And Henry Matthews was a builder, and he was going to help Robert. And so Curtis and Eric, they put those two boys to work to chop down all these trees where the house was going to stand. And I was so sick. I was sick with the flu. And I said, I don't care where you put the house. I just go ahead and put it wherever. So it didn't face due south, but and we should have done a lot of things different, but we didn't. So anyhow, these two boys, they put them to work. And if you talk to them, they said they thought they'd never get it done. And the two of them learned to work together with the saw and the axe and whatever. And when Robert and Matthews came back to the place, they had it done. And that was something that those two boys, I don't think we'll ever forget, because they said it looked like they'd never, ever get it done. And when they worked together, they found out it was pretty good deal. Living there was just a dream for Robert and I both. We always wanted a log cabin, and we heated the log cabin with just a fireplace for quite a few years until the fireplace burned out. And then we had to haul our own. We'd cut our own wood and haul it. And one day we decided we'd get 2 loads of logs instead of 1. And on the second load, we had a flat tire, and we were up on the mountain, and we could just see this whole thing rolling down. But we managed, Robert, with his ingenuity, just managed to figure the whole thing out. And he says, now just stay back and do exactly like I say. Don't vary. Everything I tell you, do it just like I tell you. And I was scared too, because here's this big load of logs and the truck and a flat tire, and you have to raise it. Mm-hmm. So we worked together on that though and got it done, but we never did try 2 loads of logs again. We stuck with 1 load, but we were exhausted, absolutely exhausted. And one time we took a trip in the backwoods. This is off of when we were living in Ashton. And he was going up a road. I said, hey, don't do that, because we're going to get bogged down. Nah, we'll get through it. Robert, I don't think you ought to do that. He says, watch, this will go right through. It didn't. We got stuck, and I says, now what are we going to do? He says, well, let me think about this. So we had to both get a bunch of branches and whatever we could to put in there until we built it up to where he could finally pull that pickup out of that mucky mud. But he was a daredevil, and when we went to Alaska, the same thing. He built a front for the pickup, and we took the trailer up there, and we went on roads that he took every road that was possible to travel. He was an adventurer, and it was an adventure living with him. So, but anyhow, building the cabin, he said at the end of the day, his arms felt like they were hanging down to his ankles. But he certainly worked hard, and he was so sure that everything, he was really a purist. He had to have everything just exactly right. And in fact, Joshua had a run-in with him one time when we were doing the foundation for the garage with logs, and Joshua was digging the trench to put the foundation in, and he was goofing off, and Robert made some remark to him that made Josh mad, and he took that shovel and the dirt just flew. Robert had to come in the house so he could laugh because it was so funny. And I asked Josh if he remembered that, and he said, yes. I was mad. And I said, I know, from the way that shovel flew and the dirt flew. But building that was a dream. And it was a dream come true. We lived in the upstairs bedroom because we didn't have a bedroom downstairs to begin with. That was all full of stuff that needed to be put into the house at the proper time. And he built plyboard cupboards for me, and then I got some fabric and put in front of them, and that's how we started out in that house. But it's been fun, and we had bear, we had deer, we had elk, and we had moose, lots of moose. The first year we were there were 6 moose that would park themselves on the one hillside because the sun hit them. We had experiences with the moose too. But we lived a life that we really wanted to live out there, and there were times in the winter that we couldn't get out for maybe a whole week or so. The first year we lived there was 6 foot of snow on the level, and we had 600 yards, wasn't it, to the road, I think it was. The road was like a canyon because the car just looked like a toy car. But we'd keep the road clear. He'd take the rototiller down the hill and up the hill, and then I'd take it down the hill and up the hill, and then he'd take it down and up again, and that was just opened wide enough for a small car to get through.
It's a lot of work.
And we had fun doing it. We learned to cross-country ski. We took hills that we didn't know. We'd take them one at a time. One person would go down first and then the other, because on cross-country skis, when you go down a hill, it's not like skiing with skis that are downhill skis.
You don't know if you can stop necessarily.
And he got a snowmobile. Oh, you have to stop?
Oh, no.
Oh, and snowmobiling. And I'd gone to Idaho Falls, and I had to walk all the way back in because it was so muddy you couldn't drive a car. But the moon was shining so clear I could see my way. When I got home, I looked at his face and I said, "What's wrong with your face?" And he said, "Nothing." So I went to bed because I was tired, and the next morning I looked at his face, and man, he had really got it mashed in doing something. And I said, "What did you do?" And he told me that he had taken the snowmobile and had missed the one drift, and he made this high-flying jump with the snowmobile across this one kind of a little chasm. Snowmobile was stuck in the snow yet. It wasn't even there. But I was just glad he wasn't dead. But we got that taken care of too. We learned to do a lot of things. And he'd send me off to fish with you guys while he worked on the, because we were, I guess, more bother than help to him at particular points along the way. But the first year when we were building, we did get the sides of our log house up, and we had the windows all boarded up with the logs in between, so that because logs have a tendency to sink, and so they had to stay there a while. So the next spring when we went up, why, the walls were still kind of like, I mean, not the walls, the road. The drifts were so high that it was just like going down a snow canyon. Snow walls on both sides of us. It was a dream come true, and we lived that dream. We were there for 25 years before Robert died. And the day before he died, I'll never forget, because he was just like his old self. He couldn't talk, but boy, he could sure write on his little board. And we had so much fun. He was just full of good humor that day, and I had never seen him look so good in a long, long time. And it was the next day that he got really sick. And I knew I was going to lose him, but we had talked about it. We'd had the opportunity to discuss it. And he buoyed me up. He said, "Now, don't worry. You'll do just fine. You're a smart lady." And I thought, boy, he's got more faith in me than I have. But it's held true. I just figured that the Lord would take care of me, and I'd do what I had to do. And I lived there for 2 years after he died, but then it got too much and I had to sell. So we divvied up everything with the children as far as whatever they wanted. And then when I pass on, what's left will be divvied up among the 6 of them. And it's I'll be buried in the Ashton Cemetery alongside of him. He wanted to die in his home, which he was able to do. And thank the Lord I was healthy enough to care for him. And he wanted his sons and sons-in-law to carry him to his grave. And he wanted the taps. And he got all 3 things. And I felt good about that. So, and other than being a little thinner, he got very thin, but he handled his cancer with the greatest of dignity, and just held on to everything that he could for as long as he could. And then he was ready to go, because when he got out of bed, and I was in there with him, and I said, "Honey, you can't do that. You're going to fall." And I had to call for Virgil. Your dad was there, thank heavens. And he helped. But when Robert got out of that bed, he was walking towards something. I have no idea what, but he had the biggest, sweetest smile on his face I ever saw. And he had a happy face. Virgil picked him up and put him back in bed, and then I just sat there with him until his last breath. But I love him as much today as I did then. And Curtis and Eric wrote a song about my hero I called him my hero all the time. He said, I can't understand why you're sticking around with me. And I said, it's easy to understand. I love you. That's why. Anyhow, he couldn't understand why anyone would want to. And I said, it's a privilege, Robert, to be able to care for you. And it was. And there hasn't been, I haven't seen anyone that would ever match up to him. When I bought a new bed after he died, the salesman said, I said, well, I don't want a big bed. He says, well, you don't know. And I said, yes, I do. And you've had the best. Why would I get somebody else? It's been lonely without him, but I've had the first 2 years after he died, I was busy. My sister was dying of ovarian cancer. I went to Florida to be with her. And then my other older sister, who lives in Florida, was having a few problems. But she still lives in Florida, golfs 3 times a week, goes to exercise, doing fine. And I just feel grateful for every day that I have and hope I do the very best, do what the Lord expects from me. And I think I've got enough family around that, and I'm so grateful for Peggy because it's been good for her as well as for me, for the two of us to be together. But I've told her, I said, now if ever I start getting in your way and you want to go on to something else, she said, don't worry, you won't. And I think she'll be upfront with me because I've wanted all my kids to be upfront with me. Our family, as you know, still doesn't always agree. We have different philosophies on quite a few things, but they stick together regardless. And I hope that continues. 88 years, you miss a lot. You can't tell it all. But it's, we both lived through the Depression.
Yeah.
And both lived through the Second World War and have seen all these skirmishes and have had someone from our family, our children, our grandchildren, or someone from the family in each of the services. And that was something Robert was proud of. But I'm just grateful for the life I've had. And I thank the Lord for it. And for all of you, I'm so proud of you. And all of you, I want you to know that I may not always have agreed with you, but I have always loved you and will continue to.